broaden the base. In tax policy, there's a mantra that says, if you want to have an impact, you have as many sources as possible covered. That way you've got all of the contributors to the issue paying in, and you can meet your targets by having a lower rate. So cover as many sources as possible. I've got a slide in a minute that says it's about 75 to now approximately 80% of the sources of GHG in British Columbia, in quantity terms, are covered by the BC carbon tax. Simple. From start to finish, from the design stage to flipping the switch in a carbon tax in British Columbia was under a year. It is collected through the normal tax collection agencies of the government. The compliance costs on the part of business are low relative to other forms of things they have to comply with, and it came in like that. Compare it to a cap and trade system where you have to write rules, you have to decide how the allowances are going to be auctioned, you have to deal with the offsets or not, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We started talking about a cap and trade system many years ago, and we're not there yet. Very simple, relatively speaking. Flexible, I can announce the rates, I can raise the rates, I can lower the rates. Again, flip of the switch pretty much in terms of flexibility. In British Columbia, it's very, very transparent. As you probably know, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the tax, by law, must be returned to British Columbians. The government cannot use it as a revenue source. And every year in the budget and the budget update, you will see the accounting of the carbon tax to show you where it goes, and I will show you that in a few minutes. But the final thing is, there will be entities, businesses, and individuals who will find it really tough. Energy is an essential component of life. The source of your energy products, what you generate, I'm going to say electricity is essential. We can't function in modern economies without electricity. Totally essential until we discover some new technology. I don't know what it is. It doesn't matter what the fuel is, as long as the lights stay on. So, but there are people, if we get these rates up too high, clearly there are people for whom this is going to be a big burden. So you want to think about that in your tax policy design as well. I don't expect anybody to read this chart other than to show you there is one of these simple charts. These are the fuels that are covered by the carbon tax, and this is the schedule of what it's going to do from, well, what it did from 2008 up to going to July 2012. The one we all think about, because it affects our daily life, is gasoline. Up there started at 2 cents a liter. By 2012 it's up to 7 cents a liter. Anybody remember the price of gasoline when the carbon tax came on? $1.50 a liter. When the carbon tax was introduced in British Columbia, gas prices were hovering around $1.50 a liter. After that, the prices fell, and they're going back up again. So if you think of the fuel prices for gasoline, they've ranged over the duration that the carbon tax has been in from $1.12, $1.10, all the way up to $1.50 a liter. So the first question you want to ask yourself is, how apparent is this tax to consumers relative to the bouncing around of the market price of gasoline?
Just a very quick question, Nancy. Aviation fuel, is that just intra-province?
You gas up outside, you gas up outside? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't count flights to and from BC.
No.
Is this chart available anywhere?
Yeah, it should be on the government's webpage. But I can send anybody, if you send me an email, I'll send you the whole slide deck if you want. It's on, if you go to the BC government's, just Google in carbon policy or something like that, you should be able to get it. It used to be, I'm not sure what ministry things are in, keep looking, but you should be able to find this stuff, because this is from the government.
Okay.
This is one that puts it, this chart gives it to you in terms of cents per unit in which the commodity is sold. This one shows you what I was getting at earlier, the relative prices in terms of energy units. So this is at different prices, and I'm sorry, the fonts or the colors don't show up that well, 20 a ton, 30, and 50. And it shows you in terms of gigajoules, so it's a unit of work, of energy. And here's the point I was making before. Without the carbon tax, you would get, whatever the energy costs of coal versus natural gas. Coal's cheap, natural gas was more expensive. But here it shows you that what can begin to happen when you get the relative prices changed. Coal now is twice as expensive in terms of the tax rate as natural gas because it's much more carbon intensive. So now thinking not beyond our frame as households or individuals, if you're an industry and you have the opportunity to switch fuels because what you really want is the work out of it, you don't really care what the fuel is unless like it's coal for coking as an essential input into your production process, you're going to start looking at ways to get off coal and onto natural gas. And that is what, again, thinking of when it's time for infrastructure to change. This is 2007 data and it's changed a bit. Where does our carbon come from in British Columbia? Transportation. We don't have coal-fired power plants. Our power plants, as you all know, are mostly hydroelectric with some thermal and diesel generators in parts of the province where we can't get the transmission up to it, plus the Burrard plant, which is natural gas. So the biggest share is transportation. If you look at our fossil fuel sector, that's up there at 13%, and the rest of it's all over the place, little bitty parts of the pie chart. That just shows you the same thing in actual tonnage instead of percentages, but it's telling you the same picture. So as I said before, most of it, a little more than 3/4 is covered by the tax. Here's the stuff that's aren't. And there are other regulations, and I believe some of the fugitives are now in. There have been some revisions to the tax coverage since its implementation in 2008, and that's why I think the number's up a bit more, now closer to 80. These are all going to be covered by other policies or are already covered by other policies in the works, although some are still going. If you look at by sector now, here's the industrial sector. The biggest share within industry is, however, upstream oil and gas. So bear that in mind with other provincial policies where we do have kind of, a policy connection issue between are we promoting the exploitation and extraction of natural gas and all of that good gas that we've discovered. What are we going to do about the GHGs? As a share of total, they're under 15%. But as we increase that sector of the industry, their share will go up if the others go down, and they're the biggest component of it. As you go down here, mining is next biggest. As I said, there still is some electricity generation, although that percentage should be coming down with the renewables, and then we go on. But British Columbia is quite different than other provinces. You would see a very different distribution if clearly, Alberta, you would, Saskatchewan, this would be way, way bigger. Ontario, it would be manufacturing. Get a way bigger share of carbon coming from manufacturing. That just shows you the fuels. Let me go to residential. By far the biggest contribution is our transportation system. So most of it is the vehicles that we're driving. Space heat, yes. Home heating, natural gas. Again, if you heat with electricity, you will, by and large, and it gets tricky how you allocate electricity because it depends on where those electrons are coming from. But by far the biggest share from the household contribution is our transportation network. So that's where we are, that's the tax rate, that's why taxes are there. What about the specifics of the BC carbon tax? So as I said before, by law, the tax revenues must all be returned to British Columbians. These are the 4 basic ways. British Columbia government cut both the personal and the corporate income tax rate. The tax rate cuts were done not across the board, but the biggest share of the personal tax rate stopped at the second tax bracket. And I'll show you what those revenues are in a minute, or what those returns are. Cut the corporate tax rate, both the regular business and the small business tax rate. And what happened is this was supposed to be phased in over time. But 2008 wasn't a very good year for the world. The recession happened, and what the government did was accelerate the tax cuts. So they brought in the tax cuts, they were going to phase them in, they brought them in sooner to, use